Good afternoon. Welcome to the CEB webinar, Beyond Bars and Walls, Modernizing Prison Systems to Unlock Social Inclusion. Social exclusion and inequalities can be a driver along the pathway to detention. Having been imprisoned once increases the likelihood of being imprisoned again in the future. This webinar will focus on various innovative initiatives in European countries that can have positive rehabilitative effects for individuals who have gone through the prison system. It is my pleasure to present our speakers today. We have Tomáš Boček, Vice Governor for Target Countries at CEB. We have Tanja Rakusic-Hadzic, who is Head of Cooperation in Police and Deprivation of Liberty Unit at the Directorate General of Human Rights and the Rule of Law at the Council of Europe. We also have Kim Ekhaugen, who is Head of International Cooperation at the Directorate of Norwegian Correctional Service. Also joining us is Lars Olof Øster, Governor of the Oslo Halfway House. Ellen de Vos is European Coordinator of the Rescaled Initiative. We have also Jerome Constanzo, who is Technical Advisor for Judicial Administration at the CEB. And last but certainly not the least, Monica Scatasta, who is Director of Technical Assessment and Monitoring Directorate at the CEB. Our discussion is organized in two parts, followed by a Q&A session, and we should wrap up by 4 p.m. We will begin with the opening remarks by Vice Governor Boček. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you and good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to welcome all of you today to discuss how we can enhance social inclusion of individuals who have gone through imprisonment. The Council of Europe Development Bank is the only multilateral development bank in Europe with a uniquely social mandate and the only one financing investments in prison projects. The opportunity to identify emerging challenges and share best practices in this area is therefore extremely important for us. At CEB, we believe that improving detention conditions and supporting reintegration of former convicts is crucial to support social cohesion. And our work in this area is guided by the values and principles of the Council of Europe. By the way, if there is an area where CEB's close relationship with the Council of Europe is particularly visible, it's in the financing of prisons, where we promote our common objectives of more human and socially effective penal systems. So now let me clarify why investing in prisoner social integration matters. We know that many prisoners come from economically and socially disadvantaged backgrounds and that discrimination and lack of opportunities may have played a role in their incarceration. The social exclusion faced by already vulnerable persons prior to entering prisons tends to be exacerbated by time spent in custody. Even the shortest prison sentences may result in social stigmatization and further discrimination after release. And long sentences often result in a double punishment when the deprivation of liberty is coupled with incarceration conditions that generate negative impacts on prisoners' health, skills, and connections with the outside world. So these problems are aggravated by poor conditions in too many European prisons. Outdated infrastructure, lack of resources, and persistent overcrowding in some institutions pose a threat to ensuring fundamental human rights and hamper opportunities for positive change. As a result, for a large share of prisoners, release from prison is accompanied by intensified vulnerability related to homelessness, malnutrition, aggravated addictions, deteriorating health, and general insecurity. Devoid of viable options for leading a crime-free life, some former prisoners may relapse into criminal behavior and face repeated incarceration. We also know that better prison conditions and rehabilitation opportunities can contribute to breaking this vicious circle of vulnerability and incarceration. International experience shows, and we will hear some evidence today, that investing in reintegration can have a real positive impact on social inclusion and well-being for prisoners and for their communities. Let me now briefly turn to what we at CEB are doing in this field. Integration of the most vulnerable groups into society and ensuring equal opportunities to all lie at the heart of the Council of Europe Development Bank's mandate. Since 2005, the bank has approved 370 million in loans to build or reconstruct 7 prisons in Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, in Ireland, in Serbia, in the Republic of Moldova, and in Romania. The bank primarily provides financing for prison infrastructure with the objectives to improve living conditions, reduce overcrowding, facilitate more meaningful family visits, and provide appropriate space for training and rehabilitation opportunities. However, at CEB, we also recognize that construction or reconstruction of infrastructure may not be sufficient to induce positive change. Therefore, we can also finance staff training and expenses related to the educational and vocational activities for prisoners. In addition, CEB may provide grants through its social dividends account to support more innovative initiatives, such as those that will be presented later today. In addition, CEB is active in sharing its experience and fostering debate within the sector. And I'm proud to invite you to read our recent technical brief that gives the title to today's event and explores its topics, but also our prior in-depth review of a case study on prisoner reintegration in Ireland. Today's webinar reflects this work and aims to further the debate. And as I mentioned earlier, the CEB's work in this and other fields is guided by the standards and principles of the Council of Europe. Most importantly, all CEB-financed prison projects must be in line with the European Prison Rules, EPR, and the recommendations of the Council of Europe's European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the famous CPT. To this end, we also cooperate with the Council of Europe at an operational level, where we are in close dialogue with the CPT, which is in charge of ensuring prison compliance with the EPR across Europe. And we also cooperate with the Directorate General for Human Rights and Rule of Law, which is represented today by Ms. Tanja Rakusic-Hadzic, and provides technical assistance to national administrations and government agencies. So let me close now by saying that prisoner reintegration and social inclusion at large need action beyond prison systems. Developing strategies to tackle inequalities and exclusion remains the most effective way to reduce crime and vulnerabilities related to imprisonment. More integrated cross-sectoral policies and projects are needed to address these multifaceted challenges. So I trust that our webinar today will give us some food for thought by exploring challenges and opportunities related to social inclusion of the most vulnerable. And I wish you all a fruitful discussion.
Well, thank you very much for this overview of CEB's work in the penitentiary sector and for elaborating on why investing in prisoner social integration matters. We will now start the first round of questions, which focus on what is being done in Europe to promote prisoner reintegration. The Council of Europe is a key institution in setting up prison rules and standards. Now, how do these rules promote prisoner reintegration, and have they evolved over time? I invite Tanja Rakusic-Hadzic to address these questions. Please, the floor is yours.
And in Paris, and I don't see other cities. Let me just briefly lead you through Council of Europe work on standards in this particular part, and then we'll move later on to the cooperation. As already mentioned, the Council of Europe is the leading intergovernmental organization with extensive and recognized standards in the area of human rights protection. The work in this area is based on established synergy between relevant Council of Europe standards and the monitoring mechanisms put in place to supervise their implementation by the member states, such as the European Court of Human Rights and, as mentioned, the CPT, and the technical assistance activities provided to help countries in need to improve, and in this particular case, improve work of the prison staff, detention conditions, or the treatment of detainees. The standards elaborated by the Council of Europe and the findings of its monitoring bodies are the basis for the technical assistance provided, and the later, in turn, allow the Council of Europe to be better informed of the situation in a given country, and if necessary, adjusting the standards and their interpretation in order to better reflect the existing laws and practices in Europe whilst ensuring full respect for human rights. Allow me to reflect right now on the most prominent Council of Europe standards on prison elaborated in European prison rules that are originally drafted back in the 80s and then revised. And the most recent version is 2006, revised in 2020. This also shows this feature of Council of Europe standards that are alive and developing all the time. Of course, I will focus just on a few basic principles that are relevant for today's topic. When deprivation of liberty is used, questions of human rights inevitably arise. Rule number 1 underlines the truth in the context of requiring respect for prisoners' rights. Such a respect demands the recognition of their essential humanity. The European Court of Human Rights has emphasized this respect for human dignity underpins the very essence of the European human rights system, and it should be extended to all prisoners. It goes further by saying that the loss of the right to liberty that prisoners suffer should not lead to the assumption that prisoners automatically lose their political, civil, social, economic, cultural, and other rights as well. Inevitably, these rights will be restricted by the loss of liberty, but such further restrictions should be as few as possible. The overall principle of proportionality that governs, and of course, in accordance with the overall principle of proportionality that governs all such restrictions. The European Court of Human Rights had also consistently held that under Article 3, this is the article that forbids any kind of torture of the European Convention of Human Rights, that suffering involved must not go beyond the inevitable element of humiliation connected with the detention. The state must ensure that prisoners are detained in conditions which are compatible with respect of human dignity, and the manner and method of execution of the sanctions or measures do not subject them to distress or hardship of any intensity exceeding the unavoidable suffering inherited in the detention, and that given the practical demands of imprisonment, their health and well-being are adequately secured. In accordance with Rule 53, special high security and safety measures, of course, should be used as last resort, and same applies to the separation. The European prison rules also underlines that the lack of resources cannot justify a member state allowing prison conditions to infringe the human rights of prisoners, nor are the policies and practices are routinely allow such an infringement are acceptable. The European Court of Human Rights has also held that it's incumbent on state to organize their penitentiary system in the way that ensure respect for the dignity of prisoners, regardless of financial or logistical difficulties. It also emphasized the positive aspect of normalization. Life in prison can, of course, never be the same as a life in free society. However, active steps should be taken to make conditions in prisons as close to normal life as possible, and to ensure that this normalization does not lead to reproducing undesirable aspects of community life inside the prison. This particular principle has a strong bearing on the requirement of preparation for release from prison and reintegration into free society of persons who have been deprived of their liberty very often we say that the first day of serving prison sentence is the first day of preparation for release. That would be all from me for the time being. And of course, I'm available for all questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanja, for this elaboration on the Council of Europe's work and prison standards. Now we will turn again to the CEB, and we will look into the question of how CEB supports social and reintegration objectives when it finances prison infrastructure. And I invite Jérôme Constanzo to address this question. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. And first, this is an interesting question because imprisonment and deprivation of liberty is somehow the exact contrary of social reintegration. But nevertheless, we do care about social reintegration when we are requested to finance prison projects, and we could consider we consider it at, let's say, 4 levels, and we'll see that they echo very much to the EPR as they were presented by Tanja. The first level is simply to ensure decent living conditions for inmates in prison, because it would be totally irrelevant to speak about social reintegration if the basic needs and the human rights of inmates are not respected. And that meets some of the most pressing needs in the sector, which are faced in all countries where we work and even in the world, which are issues of overpopulation, dilapidated infrastructure which is not designed as to comply with the EPR because the windows are too small or spaces cannot be reorganized. So that makes totally sense in this respect for us to finance prison facilities, and this is the first level. The second thing we look at when we finance prison is to ensure that the design forces appropriate infrastructure which is dedicated to future social reintegration. And here I'm talking about classrooms, workshops, spaces for family visits which are friendly for kids, for example, spaces where inmates can re-socialize, a good balance between re-socialization within the prison and intimacy. And so we looked at those facilities exist in the prison design, but also how they are adapted to the local context and how they are sized compared to the size of the prison itself. And to give an example, when we financed a prison in Cork, Ireland, some years ago, a great emphasis was put on the workshop component of the project because work in prison was a key feature of that project, and it was very taken into account during the design. Then the third level is how this infrastructure is operated. Because of course, having a classroom is well, but if you don't have the teachers, it's pointless. So here we start being at the limit of CEB's liability because we are not operating prisons, we are not even designing prisons, but in our dialogue with our counterparts from the various countries, we investigate and talk on how the prison will be staffed, whether this staff needs some specific training to deliver all the services related to which help future social reintegration. We ask whether specific institutional arrangements are necessary or foreseen with line ministries of health and education or with the civil society to deliver in-prison services which will help social reintegration. And the fourth level is a bit ancillary, but very interesting in my point of view and promising. It is to explore the connections between the prison and the community and its environment, because a prison is a facility which needs to be supplied. So it can become a kind of market for the local economy, for food supply, for example. It can be an opportunity to create local jobs for the population around, and also work which is done in prison could benefit the population. Inmates can provide services, community services. So we look at these aspects which altogether could somehow contribute to abolish the mental barriers between inmates and the population in a context where we cannot avoid keeping the physical barriers, the bars, fences, and walls. So this is briefly and in a very analytical manner how we do address the social reintegration issue when we look at when we finance prison buildings.
Okay, well, thank you, Jerome. I think this is a nice segue to our next speaker. 30 years ago, Norway started developing a new concept of open prison known as halfway houses. How are these institutions different from more traditional prisons, and what was their impact in Norway? So I'll give the floor to Lars Olof Uster, the governor of the Oslo Halfway House. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Well, like I was introduced, my name is Lars. I'm the governor of Oslo Halfway House, which has 2 small units with 16 beds and 20 beds. I've been having this work for almost 30 years, so I know my halfway house, at least in Norway. Our job is mainly to prepare these, I call them clients, to the normal life situation. It's kind of a sort of training center. So, it's in Norway you have high security, low security, and then you have halfway houses. So when they are at our place, they will have staff without uniforms. They will have the opportunity to go to work or study each day. They have many opportunities to go out on leaves. They will have their cell phone, the key to their own room. It's very soft, but at the same time, we have rules and orders. So we take drug tests and work with them closely in many ways. But it's a kind prison. So it's the last stop before freedom. So we have many people on long sentences who need that time before they go out to the community again. They can stay at our place for 18 months at maximum. And during that time, they will work closely with a staff member. They will have to have a positive plan for the future. We believe in, of course, showing them respect and kindness. At the same time, they have to take responsibilities for their actions. And we expect them to work closely with the staff for a positive future so that they don't reoffend to new criminal activities or to prison. Almost never people, break the rules. They are really appreciating the opportunity to finish their sentence in this way. They write an application from prison with high security. We have them for an interview. And after the interview, it's up to me as a prison governor to decide whether they can come to us or not. I have all decisions up to 10 years of sentence. So it's up to me and my staff to decide whether they shall be released, what kind of conditions they will have for their release, and so on. We also work with some of them from halfway house to home detention without electronic monitoring. Then we visit them at home. They come to the halfway house twice a week. And we also follow some of them up on conditions for release, where they otherwise normally would go to the probation office. So, we work with them before the release and also after the release. It's a great job. I have both prison officers and social workers working at my place. It's a really positive work environment. During my almost 26 years in this business, I never experienced any threats against me or my staff, and I'm really proud to say that. We work, of course, with dynamic security. People are different, prisoners are different. You have prisoners who need all kinds of help, and we have prisoners who are self-going, and we will never see again in prison. I didn't mention that, but one of my facilities have both men and women, and we think that's a success because that's how they live out in the normal society. While the other facility have many sex offenders, so at that place they are only men. I just have to think if I forgot something. It's people. they are either students while they're at the halfway house, at the university or business school, whatever, or they are working in normal work activities, or at work activities which are specialized for helping those with some kind of who need a special treatment. So during daytime they're all out, either working or studying, and during the afternoon some of them might have visits or they will go out for a leave, and also this in the evening. So in a way they are 50% out in society and 50% still at the institution. And it's great work. So I recommend this for every country who doesn't have a halfway house. It's our goal is of course that they will never be back in prison. So that's what we do. We invest our time and resources in them, and we do that because the goal is that they will not get back to prison. So thank you.
Thank you, Lars, for sharing this experience. Certainly is unique to some countries. The Rescaled initiative is going one step further to challenge the very concept of prisons. Could you, Hélène, tell us more about the detention house concept?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Rescaled supports the use of detention houses instead of large prison institutions. So we do not propose an alternative measure, but we really want to change the context in which incarceration takes place. And our underlying idea is that what we expect of a prison or of liberty deprivation has changed a lot over time. And when prison institutions were used in the 19th century, they were designed for solitary confinement, which was supposed to lead to moral improvement. But now, 200 years later, we know that solitary confinement has very negative effects on people's mental and physical health. So both prison research, but also international human rights instruments, as Tanja has also explained before, have advocated now for to shift towards reintegration, rehabilitation, the normalization of prison conditions, the restoration of any harm that was done. And that's very different from this initial idea of solitary confinement and moral improvement. But nevertheless, the concept of prison, so the built environment, has stayed largely the same over decades and even centuries. So we see that it's challenging to work in a prison context to offer meaningful activities to really prepare prisoners for release from within a prison. And that's because this concept was not really meant or not really designed for it. So based on this experience, both in small prisons, large prisons, and based on research and human rights instruments, this concept of detention houses was developed. And what makes detention houses different from the traditional prison institutions is that they're built on 3 principles. And these 3 principles need to be together to really work. So the first principle is small scale. The second is differentiation, and the third one is community integration. And with small scale, we mean the size of a house rather than the size of an institution. So where communication is more personal, less bureaucratic, where incarcerated people and staff can really get to know each other and work together in a more constructive way, which we know has a significant impact on the social atmosphere and on the working methods. Then differentiation means that those many small detention houses will differ so that they can all offer individually tailored support. So they will not only differ in security measures, but also in terms of work, education, counseling. And then the third principle is the community integration, which Jerome has already touched upon. And we mean a two-way interaction between the detention house and the community. So local teachers, psychologists, social workers will enter the detention house to offer their services there, at least for a high security detention house. And then at the same time, each detention house should also add value to the neighborhood. So for instance, by managing a repair shop, a restaurant, a coffee bar. And we believe that that would not only be beneficial for the people directly involved, so the incarcerated people and the staff, but it will also be more sustainable in a social and environmental way as well. So now, how is a detention house different from, for instance, the Norwegian halfway houses that were just presented? They're not. We think that some Norwegian prisons, but also in other countries, as long as they're small scale, differentiated, and community integrated, can actually be very good examples of detention houses. But Rescaled advocates for a general use of those detention houses. So not only for low security, but really for all incarcerated people. So also detention houses with a high security level. And even with a high security level, we really think that the community integration is still important and also still possible. For instance, if the detention house has a repair shop where the neighbors can bring their broken stuff and have it repaired by the incarcerated people. So in short, detention houses are places for incarceration, be it pre-trial or as a sentence, that are small scale, differentiated, and community integrated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this elaboration, Hélène. And we'll now start the second round of our questions, which focus on going beyond bars and walls and on the challenges and opportunities, especially with regards to scaling up such initiatives. We'll take our speakers now in a reverse order, so I'll come back to you, Hélène. Rescaled is planning to expand in the near future, and I'm wondering, what is the role of national and local authorities and communities and other stakeholders to ensure successful scaling up? I mean, you touched upon this in your previous presentation, but maybe you can elaborate even more. So please go ahead.
Yes, sure. Rescaled is currently active in 5 countries. That's Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, France, and Portugal. And what we notice is that when we speak to local and national authorities or policymakers, they're in general quite welcoming or positive towards the concept of a detention house, and often on 2 conditions. And the first is that we have the impression that the more or the better they understand the concept, the more positive they are. And what's a common concern is, for instance, the security. So we really have to explain that if we're going to replace all prisons with detention houses, that there will also be detention houses with a high security level. So security is still taken seriously, even though dynamic or relational security will be even more important in detention houses as it is now in the current prisons. And the second condition for authorities to be welcoming for this concept is that this transition from prison to detention house should be a gradual transition, or step by step, starting with the detention houses that really meet current needs of the prison system. And that's where the 5 countries where we're active are quite different. So we see that the countries that don't have any detention houses, they like to start with the transition houses because that's a safe choice, and it's not so hard to argue that the providing a smooth transition from prison to freedom for those at the very end of their sentence is beneficial for society. And that's where we see Portugal and France, for instance, taking interesting steps or preparations to implement transition houses. But for instance, in Belgium, there is an urgent need for places for people with short sentences, because until now they were implemented or automatically transformed into electronic monitoring, but they will soon be implemented in prison. And according to the Minister of Justice, it makes more sense to have them housed in detention houses than adding this group of people to the prisons that are already overcrowded. So in Belgium, we see that detention houses that are being implemented now will be for people with short sentences or sentences shorter than 3 years. So when people start thinking in small steps, we see that this idea of replacing all prisons becomes much more realistic and more manageable. But of course, there's still a difference between liking the concept or the idea and really implementing a detention house in one's community, in their backyard. And for that, it's really important that the community, the neighborhood is involved in the process. And actually, if possible, the community should even take the lead in this process. So the local authorities, is the mayor, the city council, the local police, local probation officers, but also NGOs, teachers, social workers that will be involved in the working of the detention house, and of course also the neighbors, because it's the neighbors that need to accept eventually that there will be a detention house in their neighborhood. And we know that people usually don't like new things in their neighborhood, especially not detention. But then when people understand that the idea of a detention house is also that it adds value to their neighborhood, and that they're involved or asked to participate in defining what can add value to their neighborhood, it's a different story, and people might be more welcoming. So this idea of involving the community from the start in this process is really important to avoid a strong NIMBY or not in my backyard reaction. So I know that what I've told before and what I've told now is a quite positive story, but I know you will have much experience in the prison context, and that there are also risks involved. So I like to conclude with 2 risks in this process of implementing detention houses. The first one is that the concept as we imagine this, based on the 3 principles, small scale, differentiation, community integration, can be implemented only partially when brought into practice. So it can be, for instance, a facility that is small scale but not really community integrated, or it can be a facility that is small, but then small is interpreted as 50 places or 100 places, and then we know that it's not so easy to place it in a neighborhood and have actual community integration or this involvement of the community. So that's one risk. The second risk is net widening. So that means that there are we create more places. So that could happen if detention houses are really implemented, but not really to replace the old prisons. And then we end up with just more people under control of the justice system. So that's a risk. And that's why, and I like to conclude with that, there's a very nice development done by our Norwegian colleagues in Oslo, and that has to do with the new prison that will be built in Oslo, or the old one that will be replaced actually. And there are plans to replace the old prison with a new one outside of Oslo, but then there was a lot of resistance and from neighbors or from the community. And now our Norwegian colleagues have come up with a plan to build a new prison, but make it a bit smaller than initially designed, and have the additional places replaced with a detention house. So this detention house will not add additional places, but really replace part of an existing prison. So that's a very nice way to avoid this net widening, and is actually the way to go to really replace prisons with detention houses.
Thank you very much for the detailed analysis, Ellen. We'll now go back a bit to Norway. The halfway house concept has been exported abroad to a number of countries in Eastern Europe. So what are the challenges and opportunities of making this model work in different national and local contexts? And we'll turn to Kim Ekhaugen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I will start just by saying that I've been working in the correctional service since 1985, and I have a lot of different roles. I also worked with Lars at the halfway house in Oslo for some time, even though it's 20 years ago. And now I'm working with international cooperation. The correctional service in Norway, we work with 10 countries. At least some weeks ago it was 10 countries. Now it's 8, because we worked with Russia and Ukraine, and they are more or less on hold now. the project, but we're working with 10 countries. Most of the countries financed by EA grants and also from MFA in Norway. Why do we do that? Why do we work with all these countries? Because we think it's important to share knowledge with other countries. The correctional service worldwide is a monopolized organization. So when we are working in Norway, we think that we know best, and other countries are thinking the same. So we are working in our own bubble, and we don't see much outside our own country. So we need to cross some borders to have more knowledge and make you more clever in what we are doing, because it's always something to learn. I mean, on small details maybe, but also on system level. So we're working with Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, Czech Republic, Croatia, United States, Russia, and Ukraine. We have planned to develop or implement halfway houses in 5 of the countries: Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Poland, and Romania. In the previous program period, we implemented, or we established together with Lars as a mentor, 4 halfway houses in Lithuania with very good results. But it's very difficult to copy paste anything, and that is not allowed actually, to copy paste. Countries are coming to Norway, they want to implement the halfway house, and they think they will do it exactly the same as we have it in Norway. That is not possible. You can never copy paste one halfway house in Norway and implement it in Lithuania, for example. You have to make it Lithuanian when you're making a halfway house in Lithuania, because the regulations are different, legislation is different, and also a lot of other things are different. For example, numbers of staff, numbers of trained staff, lack of staff is one critical factor. So there are many things that makes it difficult to do it in other countries, because it's not possible to copy paste. So we are trying the best we can, and we also have done a lot of changes in the system in Norway. And if I go back in time, in the 80s, we had a lot of riots, we had HIV, we had a lot of drugs in our prisons, escapes, violence, and also 2 officers killed on duty. That was in the 80s. So the government provided us 2 white papers, one in 98 and one in 2008, where the focus area was on the prison officer's role, how to work with people. But we didn't know how to do that actually. So we had to go across some borders to find out how to do it. So when we talk about in Norway, the import model, we went to Sweden. When we talk about dynamic security, we went to England. The officer role, we went to UK and Sweden. Progression units inspired from Sweden, US. So I can continue with 15, 20 points where we actually took the best practice from different countries and put it into a Norwegian context. And now people are coming to us to get inspired, because we have quite low reoffending rate, it's around 20%, and very good results from the halfway houses in Norway. So they want to adopt the concept of halfway houses. But the truth is that we actually have stolen the idea from other countries in the beginning. So this is going in circle. So we are doing this because we want to learn more, we want to know better, and that's why we try the best we can to pick up small pieces here, small pieces there, and put it into a Norwegian context. And that's why we want to continue with international cooperation.
Thank you very much, Kim. Yeah, I guess we really have to keep in mind, yes, not just the local social context, but also legal context. As we talk about going beyond usual prison, what is the CEB doing to support inmate social reintegration beyond prisons? We're going back to Jérôme.
Yes, thank you. One facile way to answer the question would be to remind that as a bank investing in social infrastructure in education, social housing, health, support to employment, and knowing all the issues that former inmates faced in this respect, we probably support many former inmates without even knowing. But from a more proactive point of view, we do have projects in the judicial sector addressing inmates, but not being prison construction. And I would like to mention two of them today, which address the issue of return to employment for ex-inmates. The first one is started in 2011 through a loan, a 100 million euro loan from the bank to the Caixa Foundation, which is one of the largest European private foundations, which has a nationwide program, which is called Incorpora, which assists people who face difficulties to find a job to find a job. So it's a large program with 10 companies involved. And within this program, there is a subcomponent called Reincorpora, which acts as a preparation to the Incorpora program for the former inmates, or people close to the more specifically for people close to the date of their release. So Reincorpora is providing three things. First, counseling and career guidance for future former inmates, and then those inmates do training periods and have vocational training to prepare future employment. And third, they are also involved in community services and community jobs, so that they practice, but also to rebuild some connections between the inmates and the community, and to re-socialize and to regain that knowledge of contact with the public. And once they succeed to this, they enter into the Incorpora program. And this proves to be quite successful, because in over 10 years, some 20,000 inmates have gone through the project. And for 75% of them, they managed to get a job at the end of the program, and they complete it fully. For a cost per inmate, which is below 2,000 euros. So it's efficient and profitable. So this is an example of support provided by the CEB through a loan. The second example is called Ricomincio da qui, is in Italy. Here the CEB supports an institution called Per Micro, which is providing microcredit through a grant, a little less than 200,000 euro. And it's a recent initiative. It in 2019, just before the pandemic, unfortunately. And here the idea is to help former inmates to launch their own business. It's an assistance to self-entrepreneurship. And this associates four entities, so that microcredit institution, the probational services, but also some NGOs which are specialized in self-entrepreneurship, and also another institution which provides counseling for career guidance and defining its own expectations in terms of job. So this is a bit too early now to draw conclusions, because the program was largely affected by the pandemic, and it is under renewal, and probably in the next phase we'll enable to draw better lessons. But there are interesting qualitative results of this program. For example, it happened that when the program was launched, not only the inmates were interested in the training, but also the families of the inmates, the partners and the spouses, reverted to Per Micro saying, but that's interesting, could we benefit too of this program? So it was an unexpected widening of the audience and of the beneficiaries. And so this is we are currently investigating on how to keep on supporting that kind of initiative in another manner through slightly different financial mechanisms. So these are two examples of things that the CEB can do, building on its range of expertise in various sectors which are relevant for issues faced by inmates, and also taking advantage of the variety of financial instruments that we have.
Thank you very much, Jerome. These examples that you just cited, they show that beyond infrastructure, people, as in staff, authorities, and civil society matter at least as much. What is the Council of Europe doing in this respect? Tanja, I turn over to you.
Thank you, Jovana. What Council of Europe is doing, what not? It's a much shorter list if we would say what we are not doing. Unfortunately, prison sector in our member states is so, let's say, different. And I was really listening to with much attention with the about these detention houses, halfway houses, because in most of our what we call beneficiary countries, meaning countries in which we implement a country-specific project, this is very interesting topic, and some of them are interested to develop it. However, in most of these countries, we are struggling to push the approach in prison and criminal justice sector from punitive to rehabilitative. So this is the first step to change the mind of people, to bring them closer to this whole notion of rehabilitation and reintegration into society. I remember I was meeting a new director of prison administration in one of our member states, and he said, for me, this is whole new approach. I was former head of police service in my country. So for me, the main thing is to put these criminals behind the bar. I was never thinking in terms that we have to help them to reintegrate back into society. So this is something that it's ongoing in many of Council of Europe member states. Unfortunately, as Kim mentioned, numbers are not the same. Like a month ago, Council of Europe is now have only 46 member states instead of 47. And unfortunately, our cooperation project in Ukraine had to be disconnected, and we'll see and when and what will happen. And I hope that soon we'll be back and work with our friends in Ukraine. We work and currently in some 16 individual projects, and there is a huge variety of topics that we are covering. And we usually say that we are a demand-driven service. And this demand comes from the European Court of Human Rights judgments and regarding the prisons, but also police, and also the CPT reports. So we cooperate not only in terms of police, but probation, police, detention houses, but also psychiatric institutions. Basically, we are trying to follow the CPT in all these places where people were held deprived of their liberty. Our projects are small. We depend very much on the external funding. And one of our main contributor is, of course, European Union. And we worked closely with the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who is also a generous contributor to the Council of Europe cooperation projects. To a certain extent, we work together with also with EEA Norway grants as an international partner organization, underlining this notion that Council of Europe standard, and what Jerome also mentioned, when countries apply for a CEB loan, they need to prove that the prisons will be built in accordance with the Council of Europe standards. And we go back a step further. we would like to ensure that these prisons are not only built in accordance with the Council of Europe standards, but also run in accordance with the Council of Europe standards. And that involves lots of capacity building, especially in these countries where until recently they've relied very much on static security. We would like to introduce dynamic security. We would like to see more staff in these prisons, better trained, better educated, and it's a long process. It's a long process, even when there is a political will and financial resources. And this is not always the case. As we usually say, putting prisons on top of your agenda will not necessarily win you elections. And that's also a problem. So I will finish now, but I'm again here for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanja, very much. Now we're good on time, so we can open the Q&A section, and we do already have a question regarding the cost of running alternative detention regimes as opposed to traditional prisons. Not sure who wants to take up this question, whether Kim, Lars, or Ellen. It's your decision. Lars?
Yeah, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't have an exact number to tell you, but it's much cheaper to run a halfway house than a normal prison. That's because all of the activities happen outside the prison. People are outside working. If they need a doctor, they make appointment outside our halfway house. So they only live there, and we are of course 24/7 staff there. So, but all activities happen outside. So we don't have to use money on creating sort of factories or big kitchen. They are self-going, having their own money, buying their own food, preparing their food, living like normal people. I can only say that it's much cheaper, but I can't give you an exact number. So.
Okay, well, thank you. So I guess that's could be used as an argument to sort of convince governments to try this concept of halfway houses or detention centers. We also have another question. It's about the role of inmates in these alternative initiatives. Are they consulted, and what is their feedback about such systems? I'm presuming that inmates who experience both systems, traditional and alternative ones. Who would like to take this question? Ellen, do you have any feedback or knowledge about this?
Yeah, I'll start, and then someone else can continue. Incarcerated people or formerly incarcerated people were involved in developing the concept of detention houses. And we also know from experience and from research that the existing examples that there is a high satisfaction, or the quality of life in these facilities is higher than in other facilities. But we also notice that if we go in large prisons and there ask people for their opinion, it's sometimes also difficult to think outside of the system and to really come up with, for instance, this community integration. It's hard to imagine when you are in prison. So sometimes it's also difficult for incarcerated people themselves to come up with other solutions. But the examples that we have there, I think we know that the quality of life is higher. So, but maybe.
I don't know if Kim or Lars have anything to add. Yeah, go ahead, Lars.
Yeah, just want to, I think I said it earlier, but they are very happy to be in the halfway house, and it's very seldom that they misuse the opportunity there. We can see that they, when they arrive at the halfway house, they're more nervous. It's like melting the ice because they're not used to having, the staff in normal clothing close to them, working with them. So, you know, we have a bigger staff rate at the halfway house, so it's easier for us to work closer with them, and you know, they can be more themselves when they are living in the halfway house. So you know, they're happy, very happy of being there, and yeah.
And as you said before, the outcome is generally positive, so it seems to be a good solution.
And
a good example.
I can just add, sorry, I can just add that on the other hand, it can also be hard because when they're in the halfway house, they have to step up, you know, take responsibility for their own life. When they are in prison with high security, it's more served for them. And they are tired because they're not used to working every day outside in the community. But all in all, that they are very grateful, and we release people with a hug and good luck, and it feels good, you know. And I think we have very good results, and many will come to us later and after the release and drop in and say hello, take a cup of coffee, and so this really works. So.
Thank you very much, Lars, for sharing. Tanja, I'll come back to you because you worked for a very long time with correctional services in many different countries. Are there any quick wins that could improve prisoner reintegration outcomes in any context? Not an easy question, right?
and the answer could be very short: no. There are no quick wins. There are no quick solutions. I would just refer what Kim said earlier. When they were looking for solution for problems in the region correctional service, they went and picked up from other countries, but then they had to work on these ideas, on these solutions that other countries have in their systems, to adjust it to the Norwegian legal system, to the country's tradition, to the country's political circumstances. So there is no one solution, for sure. And what we do in our cooperation project is that we offer some of these experiences from other countries. We are not saying this is how you should be doing this here in Armenia. No, we have access to 46 jurisdictions. We develop this feeling what might work in one country better than another. So we show the examples, we lead people in the study visits, we develop together with them, but always together with the prison authorities, together with their services, together with their justice sector, possible solutions. And we hope that it will work. And we insist on sharing. The more we share, like in meetings like this one, more people learn, more people open up for different solutions and for different, I don't know, to try different things. So, yeah.
Yes, I think that comes as a clear conclusion from the discussion. The sharing, and also, you know, there is no one size that fit all. Obviously, sharing of experiences is very important, and adapting to the local context, and not just social, but also legal and the general conditions in prisons. I received another question. It concerns initiatives or examples of initiatives that can help the children of prisoners retain some normalcy in their lives and not having their futures damaged. Could anyone pick on this question? Tanja, again, go ahead.
I will just refer quickly to the Council of Europe Convention on children of imprisoned parents. So this is also a consequence of imprisonment, that it's not necessarily taken into account when sentence was imposed. However, the imprisonment of one of parents affects children's life. What we did I'll just give you a small example of one enthusiastic prison governor and a small amount of money that helped create a child-friendly environment in very green prison and in one of our member states. It took a small amount of money. Council of Europe was very happy to provide. I'm speaking about 1,500 euros. That was all. The governor involved a local NGO. He managed to involve also local art school, and they created child-friendly, beautiful, as much as it could be in prison, room for children to visit their parent in prison. Because one important element to our today's topic is maintaining family ties. So after serving the prison sentence, it's likely that prisoners will reintegrate into society if they manage to preserve family ties. And this was a very small example how it could be easily done. Let's say easily try to be done. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanja. We received another question, and this is about the activity sectors that would hire former prisoners. Would anyone like to take on this question? Kim or Lars?
Yeah, I can try. Yeah, we have examples from Norway where we have hired ex-prisoners, especially in special units where they're working with drug addiction and so on. And we also have, it's not about the correctional service, but we have close cooperation with the Red Cross Network After Release, and another organization called Wayback. They are working inside and outside the prison, working with prisoners that are going to be released. So in that way, you can say that they are hired and working inside, but they have their salary from this organization outside. We also have had some, not scandals, but there has been some incidents doing that. So that makes people more scared. I mean, the old culture is still in the walls in Norway too. So that's something sometimes happen.
Okay, thank you, Kim. And there is one question. This is interesting. It's about the impact of the pandemic on prison reform.
Dialogue with correctional services. How do you select the activities which will take place in the prison? How do they adapt to the local? I remember in a very interesting discussion in one of the countries where we worked, where, for example, the correctional services were telling us, would it be possible for you as part of the project to support a modernization of our workshops, because we have the same equipment for 20 years, but so we are training, it was some technical machinery, and so we are training inmates to work on this, but when they will go out, it's a radically different equipment, and what we have is outdated, so we want to update it so that we are sure that the inmates who work in prison are trained and that their training will meet the needs of the market. And that was repeated in many sectors, because I had, as an anecdote, I had a lunch at a restaurant run by inmates, eating food grown by inmates, being served by inmates, cooked by inmates, and so on. And so there was a real ecosystem of services in the catering and in catering industry and hotel, which after was providing opportunities for the inmates, because these are sectors which hire in many countries, and they do not require huge levels of education. So this is the way correctional service on a case-to-case basis, from as we saw them and discussed with them, try to match the training of providing the work provided in prison with the needs of the local market.
Thank you very much, Jerome. I think we have time to take one more last question, and it's about the impact of the pandemic on the prison reform in the past 2 years. Is there anyone who could take on this question before we close? Tanja?
I can.
Can you please unmute?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
I will just briefly inform you that the Council of Europe is very much concerned by this topic, because we had a project running throughout the whole pandemic with all these mitigating measures put in place, having meeting like this, having training like this online. However, our colleagues that are working in prisons were not able to use this kind of technology. They were not able, of course, to watch over their prisons online. So their life definitely changed, and their approach to their work. And we are looking now, first of all, to analyze the situation we have a sample of six countries that took part in it, how they managed, what are the consequences of the working on such restrained conditions on prisoners, but also on staff, especially on mental health and mental well-being of the staff in prisons. And of course, how this shift of priorities will affect ongoing prison reforms, and whether that will change and to which extent. We are still working on it, and first draft was presented also to Europris at one forum, and we are expecting additional parts of the report to be finished, but I will be very happy. We expect it in May to be finalized, and I will be very happy to share it. It will be, of course, published on our website, where all other Council of Europe, of course, standards, findings, and everything can be found. Yeah.
Thank you, Tanja. And the very last question is about the special needs of women and how they're taken account in alternative detention regimes. I don't know whether perhaps Ellen could address this.
Yeah, I think what we see in many countries is that women get less access to all kind of activities because there's a smaller proportion of the prison population female, and they do not get access to all the programs or activities that are organized for men, which I think is also a strong argument to implement detention houses for women, because they are fewer, so it makes sense to have them in a detention house and organize the activities addressed or specifically for women. And it's actually one of the things we started to think about some time ago, to focus on a detention house for women with small children, because not in all countries, but in some countries, children under a certain age are imprisoned together with their mother, which means that some children are really locked up in quite a regular cell. So especially for those women and those children, it would take, I think, a relatively small effort and a huge improvement to have them in a detention house in a child-friendly but also women or mother-friendly environment. So I think that's a very, very important step to take.
Okay, thank you very much, Ellen. And on this note, we'll wrap up our discussion. I'll give the floor to Monica Scatasta for closing remarks. Just unmute, please.
Thank you very much. I did what I said I wouldn't do, which was to mute myself, and now I'm unmuting myself. Well, first of all, let me thank again all of the speakers. I think we had a really great discussion that covered a lot of ground, and it's going to be a challenge for me to try to summarize. But sharing these experiences, sharing these innovative ideas is indeed really fundamental. As Kim said, we're here, we're all living to some extent in our own bubbles. At the Council of Europe Development Bank, as the sole MDB financing prisons, sometimes it can feel a bit lonely, which is why it is so great to cooperate so closely with the Council of Europe. And it's also why we actually turn to you in asking to share your experiences in view also of the preparation of the publication that was at the, let's say, at the roots of this event. I think that there are just a few elements that I would like to touch upon, and as I said, I am not going to do in any way justice to the discussion that has taken place. Just a few points that stuck with me. First, the importance of, first and foremost, shifting mindsets. Helene mentioned, the 19th century vision behind the prison structures based on solitary detention and how we're moving away from this, although still sometimes in a gradual way. Tanja talked about the importance of having a change in a system from being punitive to rehabilitative and focusing on reintegration, and really like the sentence where she said, the first day of prison, of a prison center should be the first day of preparing for the release. I think we're all moving in that direction, and the focus on humanity, on the dignity and human rights really came through. As human beings, what we do is we seek connections. We want to be part of a community, and most of the discussion has really been about not just how to reintegrate at the end of the sentence, but really how do you build this sense of community, either through the specific design of certain type of structures, such as halfway houses or detention houses, and then also the connection with the community, but also in terms of human bonds, the importance also of the family bond, with the mention of the Convention on the Children of Imprisoned Parents, and solutions that can be found in this respect, and how important they are. The discussion really covered a lot of ground, focusing from, on the structure themselves, the importance of addressing today's challenges still of overcrowding, of infrastructure that are dilapidated, on the existence of facilities that may help reintegration, and especially of the different solutions that exist out there. But we've also heard that, yes, there may be different a number of solutions that can be also shared, and that where we can share experiences, but that the importance is also on tailoring this solution, both across countries, because we cannot do copy paste, as Kim was saying, also because of differing legislative context and other and institutional context, but also across structures, with the differentiation as the key principle of one of the three key principles of detention houses. We've heard that beyond looking at the structure, we need to look at the operation of the structure. And Tanja said, the standards are not just to make sure that the structure is based on the standards, but it's run based on the standards. And therefore, the importance of including, particularly for us as a financier, also the focus on soft elements, including the human capital, the staff, but also, as we said, the focus on the surrounding communities. And here, the importance of the surrounding community, not just in terms of ensuring that sense of belonging and connection for the prisoners, but also the fact that structures detention structures of different nature may potentially add value themselves to the community, and the importance of involving communities has also been very much debated today. Again, going back to the importance then of the institutional context, not only it drives the need for tailoring, but I would like to also go back to the importance of the international standards that Tanja told us about at the beginning of her first intervention, and the importance of seeing this as live instruments that evolve over time, and that evolve based on the experience, and on how monitoring this can then help us better tailor as Tanja was saying, help tailor the technical assistance for the Council of Europe, and then can help us as a financier tailor also the type of solution and the type of instruments that we may provide. So let me just conclude on some of the constraints. I would like to thank also the speaker for being also quite open about some of the risks and some of the constraints. But one of the things that we've talked about is also resources constraints. They shouldn't be a reason for not really being able to provide solutions that have human dignity at the core. And in fact, it was great to hear that some of the innovative solutions may actually have a lower cost overall. So what's not to like to some extent? Let me just conclude on a really on a positive note. I heard Lars mention a number of times the word pride, how proud he is of his job, the satisfaction also that inmates get. So it's about pride. It's about being proud of the work and ensuring that we support the pride of prisoners as well in facing the next stages of their life. And when what you said, Lars, was, you know, we say goodbye with a hug, and our goal is that they never return to prison. And I think this is the common goal that we've had today. We're also proud at CEB as, again, the only MDB that is really focusing on some of the most difficult part of this sector. And we're proud to work with the Council of Europe on this and to learn from all of you. And on that, I conclude. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Monica, for these very comprehensive concluding remarks. I think you absolutely did the justice to the whole discussion. Thanks again, a warm thank you to our speakers, and thank you to all of those who followed us on LinkedIn Live, and I hope to see you again at our next webinar. Have a very good day.